Hi, everybody. Travis Wilson here, General Manager at WisSports.net. And bringing a special video to you today is we're going to have a conversation with Mike Thompson, who is the Deputy State Director, Deputy Superintendent for the state of Wisconsin at the Department of Public Instruction, and also the liaison to the WIAA. Mike, I appreciate you coming on and spending a few minutes to chat with us today.
Thanks, Travis. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's dive right into it. And I know you've got a lot going on. Obviously, a very busy time is everything going on for schools and everything else. So we'll get right into things, and we'll kind of start with a little bit of a discussion on how DPI works with the WIAA and kind of what that relationship is like. Because like many states, the WIAA is technically an independent body, not under the state of Wisconsin per se. So how does that relationship work? What is your involvement and the DPI's involvement with the WIAA?
Sure. Yeah, as you mentioned, Travis, yeah, the WIAA is a membership organization. We aren't specifically considered a member of that organization. We serve in a liaison role. It's a long-standing role we've had with the organization for literally decades around our work and the work of schools and the work of WIAA in sports. And part of that work centers around the basic premise that athletics, school sports is the basic fabric of schooling in our state, quite frankly, the nation. It's really part and parcel of what are part of the opportunities we provide kids in their education. So that's why we have this liaison relationship with that organization.
So with that said, how do you view or what is DPI's role in high school sports in general?
Our role in high school sports, basically what I said is high school sports is part of the fabric of what makes up schooling. And it is really when schools provide this opportunity for kids, it's part of the educational experience they provide for kids. It's their kids involved in sports are preparing, it prepares them for life after high school, prepares them to have the skills, knowledge, and habits necessary to succeed in life and to be career and college ready. So part of it is the connection between the mission of schools and the role that athletics plays in that mission. They're in essence one and the same.
We're talking with Mike Thompson, the Deputy State Superintendent at the Department of Public Instruction. And Mike, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on was to chat a little bit more about some comments last week from an interview that you had done with the NBC affiliate in Madison, NBC 15. And towards the end of that interview, Morgan Wolf from NBC 15 asked kind of a multifaceted question about what you saw as in terms of getting back to some regularity, if you will. She mentioned packed hallways and pep assemblies and high school football games. And again, kind of a multifaceted question. And your response was to the effect of, you see some of those things returning when there's a vaccine for the virus. And wanted to give you a little bit of a chance to provide some additional context or clarity around that. And, kind of ultimately what that may be, what it might look like this fall, specifically as we look at sports is our focus here at WSN.
Sure. Happy to do that. The context of that interview was what is schooling going to look like? What we can predict that schooling is going to look like going forward? And part of that discussion is when's it going to be like it was in February before we got into a pandemic? When will we be back to that kind of environment where people feel safe? And that's where I made the comment. I think that's going to be a while because of the impact of this pandemic on not only how do we get through this pandemic, but how do people feel safe in the environment? And that my comment was around. I could speculate that kind of confidence will be back when we have a vaccine. Having said that, that doesn't mean schools aren't going to try to get back to normal and are going to try to normalize what they're providing for kids going forward. That doesn't mean kids won't be back in the school environment and activities. We all want those to happen. We all hope they can happen right away in the fall. Love to see it just back how it was. But even if kids go back into the school environment and we're able to provide all the activities we were provided in the past, likely they will look different. There will have to be protocols on safety. People will expect that, and the safety of kids is probably the number one priority of schools when they come into their buildings, and they're going to make sure that they do that as we move back to try to normalize our whole, I guess, society through this pandemic.
When we do get back and we start talking about those different policies and different guidelines and things that will look different for high school sports this fall and in the school year, who will ultimately make that decision? Is that something that will come from DPI, from DHS, from the governor's office? Will it be a WIAA policy, or is it kind of a collaborative effort to put those guidelines or policies in place?
Well, it's very likely a collaborative effort, Travis, around providing some recommendation guidance, but the directive on all those types of things around the safety of schools, especially around a pandemic, we really look to take our cues from the public health departments, either the state public health departments or the local or county public health departments. We're anxious to get people back into schools and to function much like they can, but the public health department is going to help us with those guidelines of safety, very similar to anything in sports, concussion protocols and all those types of things. We rely on kind of the medical profession, the people with expertise on how do we make that environment as safe as possible. Our role is more around kind of the instructional design of schools and how do you make sure those are effective for all kids. But the health and safety part of it really relies mostly on the public health department and public health professionals.
So I assume that same group would then be the ones that will give the final go ahead, the green light, the thumbs up for a return to play as well.
I think Travis, this is just my speculation on this pandemic is this won't be turned off like a water spigot and now we're done. This will be an easing back into the school environment. So for example, summer school. Districts are anxious to provide summer school in person. They're anxious to do that, and they're figuring out ways that they can do that in a safe way, in as safe as way as possible, by having protocols and procedures in place on how they sanitize the building and how they have people move through their hallways, how they social distance to the best of their ability to bring kids back in. I think that's what we're gonna find as we move through this, where districts will kind of plan for various different scenarios. That how do we move kids back into the school environment? How do we move them back totally into the school environment? And God forbid if we have to continue, this virtual environment, we have to plan for that because it's unpredictable what it's going to look like in the fall. I think everybody's hoping that, and I think everybody expects that some of these opportunities start to begin to happen of kids coming back into the building as we start moving back to providing all these critical opportunities, including sports and all of the extracurricular activities, because they're part of students' education. And so we want to bring them back as quickly as possible. Having said that, we have to bring them back in as safe as way as possible.
Obviously, there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of things to be figured out. And we won't ask you to make a prediction or anything like that. But is there a timeline on when those kinds of decisions, again, relating specifically to sports, high school sports, on when those decisions kind of have to be made, do you think, to allow people to either prepare for a return or have the guidelines in place? Is there a timeline on when some of those things could happen?
Yeah, I can't predict that, Travis. That's a great public health question. I know that there's certain benchmarks that from the public health perspective, they feel the state has to meet to be able to move into certain phases of kind of reentry or more opening up. But from a school perspective, they have to plan for various contingencies. They're planning for those now. And like I said, they're planning around how do they provide in the safest way as possible summer school. And as they plan for the fall, they're trying to plan for the various scenarios that may exist. With the intent, I think everybody's intent is we want to go back to normalization as quickly as possible for the benefit of our kids. I don't think anybody has made the statement we are being able to replicate in a virtual environment the experiences our kids had back in February in the school, with all the things that go on in the school, which I want to stress again are vitally important to the education of kids. It's not just the instructional component. All those extracurricular activities play a role in helping kids become career and college ready. And the quicker we can get back into providing those opportunities in a way that kids remember it as, the better off we all are.
One other question before we let you go. I know you've got some other things to move on to, but there have been some questions about what schools can do during this school closure period, and whether non-school groups can use school facilities, which of course are closed for pupil instruction and extracurricular activities, but can non-school groups use a school facility at this time?
On that regard, Travis, that is the decision of a local school district. And so the Supreme Court decision, as you mentioned, closed school buildings to extracurricular and instruction. Did not close school buildings under their state order to other activities that may go on in the community or other uses of the facility. That really is going to come under the jurisdictions of, likely, we'll see if different county or local health departments have restrictions that they're able to, they can, and they put in place, or whether a school district decides, makes decisions about how to make those facilities available and under what parameters. And I think what everybody would like to do is, yes, we'd like to make those facilities available, under what parameters, what protocols, to make sure that we're going to try the best of our ability to keep everybody as safe as possible.
Deputy State Superintendent Mike Thompson, we appreciate you joining us today, and we'll certainly keep in touch down the road as we all, as you said, work to get back to some kind of normalcy.
Thanks, Travis. Appreciate it.